This is the Spa Retailer Podcast, where we talk retail, business, and all things related to the hot tub industry. I'm your host, Megan Kendrick, owner of Spa Retailer Magazine. Today on the Spa Retailer Podcast, I have Steve Hammock, the former president of Watkins Wellness. As I'm sure most of you know, thanks for coming on the podcast, Steve.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Steve retired a couple of years ago, but in 2024, he was one of our very first inductees into the Hot Tub Hall of Fame. I had the chance to hand out that award to him in Dallas at the Pool Spa Patio Expo, which was a really fun experience. And I thought it'd be great to have him on and just hear the whole tale of his life in the hot tub industry.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
So Steve, where did you grow up? Where did you live? We've been talking a little bit beforehand, and it sounds like you spent some time in Pennsylvania, spent some time in Virginia. I know you were in Phoenix for a while. How did you end up in Southern California?
I was a military brat. So my dad was career military. And so people ask me where I'm from, and I tell them nowhere in particular, because he was a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and we moved every other year for basically my entire life. So yeah, I went to 14 different schools, K through 12 in 7 states, and bounced all over the place. But my parents were both from the San Diego area. And so that was always our permanent home base. So my grandparents on both sides lived out here. And I knew at some point I was going to try to get into that market when I could. And that's how I ended up in San Diego.
Yeah, man, that's 14 schools. That's a lot of moving. Do you feel like that, I don't know, helped make you into a more adaptable person? Some people I think can thrive in that, and some people have a really hard time.
It's interesting. I get asked that question a lot. It's just the way we grew up. You didn't really think about it because you're not when you're a kid, you're not comparing your life to other people's lives.
Sure.
And so you don't really have perspective on what it's like elsewhere. The Air Force was always kind enough to move us in like October rather than June, or sometime where you could get into the community and meet some people before school started and be there on opening day and all that. The hard part was always being dropped in the middle of the school year, where in every class you got to stand up and introduce yourself and where are you from and all that kind of stuff. So my brothers and I, we had a chance to go through that many times. And I'd say that was probably the challenging part. But honestly, I look back on my growing up years, and I don't feel like I missed anything. Now, I was the middle of 3 boys. We were all close in age. So you had your buddies right there, and that helped a lot moving around. But in high school got a little tougher, moving from Virginia to Arizona. But yeah, it was fine. That was just our life.
Yeah. Did you ever entertain ideas of following in his footsteps and going into the military, or did you know that wasn't the path for you?
Yeah, much to his chagrin, no. So my dad was a fighter pilot, and he would say until his last day, greatest job in the world to be a fighter pilot. And in the final years of his career, he was in a position to hand out pilot slots, which is what everybody that goes that route covets, right? Everybody wants to be a pilot. And he couldn't get any of the 3 sons to be interested. And so we passed, and I just never did have an interest in that. And that was actually upsetting to him. He'd be happy to know now that his grandson, who happens to be named after him, my son, is an aviator, but he's in the Navy. So that would have probably caused some other grief. But so he did get one.
Yeah. Well, see, there you go. My husband's father was in the Navy, and then my husband was a Marine. Yeah, we got some of that.
That friendly rivalry.
Inter conflict, all in good fun, but they would rub each other pretty hard.
Yeah.
So you ended up in Southern California in high school. Is that how you started to get involved in the hot tub industry or meet people in the hot tub industry?
Yeah, I wasn't in Southern California in high school.
I'm sorry. I said Southern California. I meant Arizona.
Yeah, so I was in Arizona in high school because my dad was stationed there, and then went to Arizona State. And right before we got on, we were talking about O.T. Neal, which was one of my mentors in the business and my original boss and the guy that hired me into this industry. And I went to school with his son. And when I had graduated from college at Arizona State and was working in the Phoenix area, and OT called me and said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody young and energetic that knows something about advertising that wants to get our advertising program going." And I had always wanted to get into the San Diego market anyway, because
Mhm.
I'd been in and out of there most of my life seeing relatives. And so I said, sure, I'll take a flyer on that. And I came out and I interviewed with them, and they hired me for absolutely nothing. I like to say that they were looking for somebody that knew something about advertising that they could for super cheap. And I was the guy that they could get for super cheap. And that's how I started in the business. And
Man.
I was looking to get a foothold into the market and thinking that I wouldn't be around there very long, because it was a very small
Mhm.
company at that point. It was
Yeah, I was gonna say, what year was this and what did the company look like at that time?
Yeah, this was in 1982, and we were probably doing about 4 million in sales or something along those lines. And we were in about a 15,000 square foot metal building on a dirt road next to a chicken farm. And that's all true. And we made one product at that point. It was literally called the Hot Spring Spa. And the goal was to just, how do we sell these things? Let's
Yeah.
go. And
Yeah.
I thought from the very beginning that the product concept was brilliant, and that, gosh, if we could just get people to listen to our story, there'd be a lot of interest here. And in a lot of ways, this has always been a numbers game. And you don't have to get millions of people to listen to your story. You just need to get so many a month to keep the thing going. And that's where we focused our efforts. And we built the business from that route. At that point, the company was still privately held. The company's obviously always been called Watkins. So you had John
Right.
Watkins and Jeff Watkins were the two principals. And then Tom Neal, OT Neal, was a friend of Jeff Watkins and invested in the business and became the third partner. And that's how the company was structured when I arrived.
So the three of them on the dirt road next to the chicken farm. Alice Cunningham has shared that story before about their first time that they visited and
Yeah, yeah.
going past the farm and there being feathers around and just sort
Oh
of
yeah.
the,
Oh
is
no.
it it?
This chicken farm was the biggest thing you've ever seen. There had to be 80,000 chicken coops up there. What's interesting about that property now, it's called today Cal State San Marcos.
Okay.
So the whole thing was gone, and there's now this giant university that sits right on that
Wow.
spot. And the metal building, which we rented, by the way, we didn't Watkins didn't own the building at the time, still there.
Really?
Still there. Yeah. Still there.
That is
Everything's paved, but the building still sits on a little bit of a hill. And then right across the street is this giant university, which used to be chicken coops as far as the eye could see.
man, that's wild.
Maybe start somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you start though? So you come into this company with
Yeah.
a new product, like a
Yeah.
young company, you're
Yep.
fresh out of college. And like you said, no one's ever really marketed these products before.
Yeah.
Where do you even start?
You had two different problems there. You had the one where you're trying to reach consumers that might be early adopters, because that's what we were talking about at that time. Somebody that's got enough money to say, "Oh, I'd be interested in something like that. It's odd. Nobody has one of these," kind of thing. So you want to reach the consumers where you can. But there was also the problem of, who do you sell through? These things are heavy. They need to be handled. They need to be addressed by people that have equipment and knowledge and things like that. And back in that day, the pool store, the pool outlet was a construction firm. They didn't really have a
Mhm.
retail shop. And we didn't know where to sell these things, frankly. And we put a lot of effort in just testing all sorts of hypotheses. We were selling to small independent home centers. We used to go to the National Sporting Goods Show in Chicago every year to see if is there room for us in a corner of a major sporting goods outlet, which you used to have back then. Now they've consolidated so much; it's very few places to go buy your stuff if you're a
Yeah.
sports guy. But and then the pool store situation at that time always felt like a bad marriage to us to a certain degree. We had some things in
Yeah.
common, specifically water, but we were a retail item. We were a merchandising item. And the principals of the pool businesses back then, these guys were engineers or construction people, and they were working outside the whole time, and it wasn't a natural fit. So
Mhm.
that was the bad news, right? It was like, where do you go, and then how do you reach people? The good news was everybody was a candidate for this product. And my gosh, if you owned a home and you had a job, okay, let's go, right? Everybody was a potential candidate. And when you would get people in hot water, nobody didn't like it. So you didn't have a lot of built-in negativity. You just had a lack of knowledge, really. So again, you'd count wins one at a time. back in that day. We
Sure.
were making, I don't know, when I started, we were making maybe 6 units a day or something like that. So to go to 10 is massive, right? There's always a story about progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you hit the road to help find dealers, or was that more? I know OT was the one who went out and recruited the
Yeah.
Cunninghams or Alice and Blair. Where did you have to do some of that too?
Oh yeah, we all did that, and I spent lots and lots of time on the road. OT's claim to fame is that he bought a motorhome and put a trailer on the back and had a unit on the back and just drove the country. He was a salesman. That's what he
Hmm.
was. His entire career had been in sales, professional sales, and
Right.
he'd had a lot of success, which is how he was able to get enough money to invest in this sort of business that was more of an idea at that time and could have gone either way, frankly. So he did a lot of that. And we only had, when I joined the company, we only had two salespeople in the whole country, a lot of the West Coast at that point, and doing that kind of thing. But that is how we built the business.
Yeah.
We traversed this country multiple times. I've been in 49 states. I've never been to Alaska, but I've been in all the other ones, and I've been in all the other ones end to end multiple times by car. There's almost no little town that I haven't been in. And then all of our team at the same time. And frankly, I think that's how the business at Watkins got built is we were young and we were hustling. And
Hmm.
people need to remember there's no cell phones, there was no internet. None of that stuff. So you didn't really have any information out there. It's almost like you were operating in secret. You've got the secret, and now you need to take it out and find people that might have an interest in this secret, but that's going to require you getting behind the wheel. And there was just no way to find out about people. You'd literally get into a town, you'd pull into a gas station, you'd go into the phone booth, and there would be a yellow pages there. And you would open that yellow pages, and sometimes you would look for the word spa, and sometimes you would look for the word hot tub, and sometimes neither one of them would be there. And you'd look at swimming pool, and you'd go in there and you'd look at who's in the market that does what, and you'd rip out a page and you'd cold call. And we did that collectively thousands of times, perhaps tens of thousands of times, as we grew a little bit and added another person and gave a little bit more territory to this person and that kind of a thing. And it was funny because sometimes you'd get into a town and the town might not be very big, right? You're in Dodge City, Kansas or somebody, and you go into the phone booth and you open it up and oh, the page is already ripped out. Somebody's been here before. Okay. Now you got nothing. Now you got nothing. And that's just the way it was. And you really couldn't even communicate with your office when you're on the road. We all had these calling cards. You're probably too young to even remember this, but the number you had to put in to identify yourself as the person making this long distance call
Hmm.
had probably 28 digits in it. You couldn't even memorize it. You're looking at this thing and you're in a phone booth and you're punching
Yeah.
it in just to try to get the phone call billed, not to you personally. You know what I mean? That's the way it was. You'd go on the road for a week and you'd be on your own. You would
Yeah.
be on your own.
Yeah. It's just so unfathomable to think about that now. When you're first talking about how do we sell these things and where do we go, the thought crossed my mind like, oh, I wonder why they never thought we'll just go direct to consumers. But it's like, how? How would you do that? There's no internet. You would have been like advertising in magazines and newspapers and
Yeah.
whatever else, television. But it's yeah, some of the things that just are such a huge part of how you would build a business today obviously weren't. And that's just
You know
fascinating.
what? It's an interesting thing that you bring up because we actually did go right to consumers. So back then, we started advertising in the airline magazines, and the
Okay.
airline magazines had a lot bigger draw than they do
Sure.
today. In fact, you fly today, and most of the time, there's not even a magazine there because people are on
Right.
their phones. Everybody's got a device. Nobody had a device back then. And magazines, as a form of entertainment and information,
Mm.
yeah, that was the heyday
Yeah.
for magazines. And I'm not talking about trades, obviously. I'm talking about consumer magazines and things like that. But you would have a captive audience on those airplanes. And we started putting ads out there and generating 800 calls to us. The problem would be when people would call in, they'd say, yeah, I'm very interested in this. Where can I go see one? Where do you live? Okay. Yeah, we've got a guy that's 18 hours away. So you'd run into these
Right.
roadblocks. So oftentimes what we would try to do is we would try to sell the consumer and get a reasonable commitment out of that particular consumer. And again, at that time, you're probably talking about a lot of early adapters, right? These are people
Sure.
that they're the front end. This is the first guy on the block that had the Tesla. And there are people out there. And again, It's a numbers game. So as long as you keep that in your head, that you don't need huge moves to make a big difference. And so we get one sold, and then we would start calling people in the market that were quote unquote wholesale people in the trade, right? Hey,
Hmm.
we ship these things 3 at a time. This is very important because the reason you can't go consumer direct really is you just can't ship one of these things to anybody and have
Yeah.
it not be literally twice as expensive, right? So we would contract with these specific carriers. We would ship them 3 at a time in a stack. It was enough for them. It got us a pretty good price. It split it 3 ways, but we'd have to ship it to one location. So you can't even split that up and go to 3 people because they're equipped to pull off a pallet, not in these hot tubs. So you
Yeah.
call these dealers and you'd finally get somebody that say, yeah, so if I buy 3 of these, one of these is already sold. And then I've got these other 2. And yeah. So we did that for a long time. And then a funny dynamic would happen. Like months would go by, 6, 8, 10 months. And you'd never hear from that retailer again. So we'd call them up and say, hey, we shipped you these 3 units and one of them was sold. And oh, yeah, do you remember? Yeah, oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah. And I said, how did that go? What's the status with that? And he said, gosh, I sold the second one when I was pulling it off the truck. Somebody came by and bought it. And then the third one just went right away. And like a year's
Why
gone
didn't you order
by, you're like,
any more?
gosh, do you think you could sell a couple more? Yeah, probably. That's literally what we were dealing with here. And it would
Yeah.
just blow your mind. If you'll indulge me, I'll tell you another story about that. So this airline program that we had put together really worked. The phones just
Mm,
rang, okay, because it was clever, it was an interesting product, all this kind of stuff. And most of these leads just they faded away because you just couldn't do anything with them, but not all of them.
mm,
I would credit that idea, which as a business person coming into this business doesn't make any sense. Well, you have no distribution. You're going to be throwing these consumer ads out there on the hope that somebody's going to, it didn't make any
yeah.
sense. And yet I would credit that as one of the primary catalysts that built this business. But we would get these things and then we would send these leads to these retailers, hoping that they would follow up with us and order some and say, hey, I'm interested in this. So you fire all these leads out, and we're keeping everything by hand back then. And my gosh, we've sent 1,000 leads to this person. So when we're on the road now and we go out there and we're sitting in front of this person who doesn't carry our product, but we've sent 1,000 leads over time. So you get a lot of people calling you about this. Have you seen this yet? Yeah. You get a lot of people calling you about that. Oh, I get calls on that all the time. I said, what do you tell those people? He goes, we don't carry that, but we carry something that's very similar and we try to get them in that way. I said, wouldn't it be easier to just say, yes, I do? I never really thought about that. Like, dude, you're getting all these calls. Just bring them in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of saying, no, we don't carry that. We carry something. Just say, yeah, I have that.
Yeah, because especially at that point, like no one would have known the difference. No one knew the
It
difference.
didn't occur to people. It was the Wild West out there, I gotta say. And persistence and passion, I think, were the 2 attributes that really pay dividends
Yeah.
because most of our people were young like me at the time. We were all about the same age, and this was a real job. We had a real job, right? And so we're directed to go out and just don't take no for an answer and let's go. And we did. And we just crisscrossed this country and we met people and we talked to people and we signed people and that's how the thing was built.
Were there some of these dealers that you set up in the early days, were there some that got it immediately and just were all in
Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
really went for it?
Yeah, definitely. And you rely on those people because they're doing whatever's considered volume at the time, they're doing the volume, right?
Sure.
And there were those people. And you had these little pockets, and you brought up Alice earlier. Up in Seattle was certainly one, right? They had a little shop right on the waterway there,
Mhm.
and they were the ones that got into the hot tub business, right? They weren't in the pool business. They thought they could make it on hot tubs, and they opened
Mhm.
the Olympic Hot Tub Company. And I don't know if you knew Blair or not, but Blair was Alice's husband, very bright guy.
Yeah, engineer.
And he was a guy that he was always in search of the better mousetrap, right? So they were making wooden hot tubs at that time or buying them, but perhaps making them themselves. And along comes this hot spring spa that was a better mousetrap. And they jumped on that. And then they started putting other pieces of the business together. My gosh, this is so much easier. The thing comes in, it's already built, it's already done, it's ready to deliver and install and plug in. We don't have to build it. We don't have to customize it. We don't have to, all these things that, you know, because there was no playbook out there, people didn't really realize that, man, they're doing a lot of things the hard way. There is an easier way. And we developed this methodology, which we just simply called sell, deliver, collect. Okay. And it was appealing to these people because remember, the people in the business too, the people in the trades, they were also early adopters. These were
Mm-hmm.
also people that were getting into something that had every opportunity to be a fad, frankly. Okay. If you think about, and again, I'm not sure exactly how old you are.
I'm 41. There we go.
What
We're just put it 41. I was born in
41.
83.
Okay, so I'm 65. So we're talking about a couple of generations, right? The water beds were on fire back then.
Hmm.
Okay. Can you even buy one today? I think you probably can, but you got to really be interested and you got to go find it. But
Yeah.
there was a point in time where that was a happening thing that was just omnipresent. It was just everywhere.
Hmm.
And we could have crested in the same way and just faded away. But
Yeah.
what it meant was the people that got into that waterbed business, and there are probably some other businesses along the lines, at least in their minds, they thought, wow, I'm on the front edge of something that's going to be big. And I think a lot of the people that got into the hot tub business said, I'm on the front edge of something that's going to be big. Now, we could argue whether it actually is big, right? You think about all the years, the decades, the hard work, the sales, the growth, and all that kind of stuff, but it's still very small. You
Right.
can get
Yeah.
in today and still be on the front edge. It's almost like we've never really had our day in the sun, even though a lot of people have done really well, a lot of companies have done well, a lot of retailers have done well, a lot of us personally have done well. There's a lot of good stories out there, but man, why doesn't everybody have one of these things? I know you would like it if you did, right? So we survived and we sustained when some of these other early faddish kind of businesses actually didn't, but they
Hmm.
probably got bigger in their at the apex than we ever have. It's just a very interesting story when you think about it like that.
Yeah, it is. We are our own little unique niche industry for sure. So, obviously, there were hot tubs before this, right? But like you were saying, most of them were the cedar, they were had to be built on site, all of that kind of stuff. It was a DIY, go out and put it together situation. So, as far as how the hot spring spa was
Yeah,
made. So, what was obviously not wood, all of the things, but just what was that like compared to the other things that were out there? How was it made? What made it special?
part of what I can say here predates me, even though the company was 5 years old when I got there. It's only 5 years old. In fact,
Yeah.
I found out many years later, like 30 years later, that I actually joined on the 5th year anniversary day.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'd never known that until probably 5 years ago. But yeah, they actually showed me the license that started the business, and I'm like, wow, I started on the 26th of September, and it was the 5 years to the day. But anyway, John Watkins, who I would describe more as the inventor, and Jeff Watkins was the engineer, but their
Hmm.
father, Leonard, was a chemist, and he had invented a gas chlorination process for residential swimming pools called pool chlor. I don't know
Okay.
whether pool chlor is still around or not, but the model that they operated is they basically sold franchise areas for individual operators to go administer this pool chlor program to this 20 square mile area of people. So you can imagine Florida and Arizona and California were the big markets for this, where you had
Mm.
a very high pool population there. And John and Jeff Watkins were running pool core routes. And at that time, you had builders that were adding quote unquote spas onto the end of pools. The challenge there, of course, is they have to be heated up. They're not sitting there hot all the time. It's not the same product that we make. And it costs a lot of money to get it up to temperature. And they're not very
Mm.
comfortable. And the jets were almost an afterthought. And so it wasn't necessarily all that therapeutic, but it was warm and it was very nice. And what the Watkins brothers observed was that the people that had these on their pools virtually never got into the pool, but they liked the little warm part over here. But there were so many things that were impractical about it, right? It was never ready when you wanted it. So you had to consciously say, I'm going to get into the spa today, and therefore I'm going to turn it on several hours before I want to get in, right? So you've got to be a committed user, or it became a special occasion thing, or oh my gosh, it costs $100 to heat that. We can't do it all the time, kind of a thing. But that
Yeah.
was the part that they wanted to use. And John just thought, man, we can make a self-contained standalone unit that we can insulate, that we can heat with a very small heater, but just maintain the temperature thermostatically, put a cover on it, and just have this sort of giant thermos sitting over on the side that's just ready for people to use. And that
Yeah.
was the impetus there. Frankly, there were some people making some hot tubs back in the day, but they literally were uninsulated. These were people that were transitioning from other businesses like boats and things like that, where they had some
Yes.
vacuum forming experience, or they had been in the fiberglass business. So they started making these fiberglass shells. The Watkins guys didn't have an existing business. And I don't know whether there were permitting issues or what, but obviously the attraction to getting into the fiberglass business is just never high, right? Unless you're
Sure.
somehow or other already in it. And even then, the few hot tubs that were out there at the point, fiberglass has its own problems, right? You tend to get what that you might call a latent defect, where it looked beautiful the day that it was installed, and then all of a sudden 6 months later, it's starting to blister a little bit. There's these problems. What do we do about it? How do we fix this? Man, you don't fix that.
Yeah.
You got to live with that, or we got to replace that. Or so they had seen enough already to say that material is not going to be the material. It's very interesting about how Watkins started, which I think made it unique at the time, was that our marketing strategy was really an engineering story. That was our marketing strategy. We felt like we were building a better mousetrap. And I believe to this day it was a better mousetrap. I think that differentiation, which is always a strategy in most businesses for a long time, it was
Right.
super real at that point. Okay. We could make some arguments here that we've constructed it this way for these reasons, right? This is going to be outside 365 days a year. It's going to be on 24 hours a day. Okay. It needs to work equally well in the winter in North Dakota, where you're from, or the
Right.
summer in Phoenix, where I'm from, right? You think about all this kind of thing, and then you're going to bring in water and electricity and probably alcohol and all sorts of other things here. And while we're not talking about rocket science here, okay, this is a more difficult thing to pull off than you might think. What else do
Sure.
you own that sits outside in the weather 365 days a year that you're going to need to be counting on right here? So there was some messaging that you can put forward to people that they're going, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so here's how we've designed this thing. It's a single piece construction. The entire cavity is filled with this urethane foam. It's a monolithic design. There were just so many things back then. It comes with the cover. The cover that's ubiquitous in this industry right now was invented by
Yeah.
John Watkins. He never patented it. He should have probably. That it didn't work without that. So he
Yeah.
had to have
Yeah.
it. So he made that. Okay. And then it proliferated throughout the rest of the industry, which is fine, but that made it work, right? How do you keep the heat in? When you're out of it, you put it on. And so that was the idea. And it was the better mousetrap kind of an idea. And it was.
Yeah. How were they doing the shells then? So they weren't fiberglass, but so they were they vacuum forming? Because it wasn't acrylic at that point, right?
Yeah, deep draw vacuum forming. And when they started before I got there, they actually had found a former in Dallas, Texas, that had the ability to produce this one piece shell. So it was what they call a double draw. So instead of drawing down into the cavity, the mold was actually upside down, and you would draw up into the cavity first, and then you would draw a second draw around the outside. So you made essentially a bowl, and then on the underneath side of the bowl you filled this thing up, and then it was sealed on the bottom with a very dense layer of urethane foam. It's almost like it'd be like a creme brulee kind of a
Sure.
casing on the top, only
Yeah.
you couldn't get your spoon through it, right? But that's how it was. So the nice stuff was inside, and then the sugar shell was on the outside, but it was impenetrable. And that's what made it just a one solid heavy structure that was designed to keep the water hot all the
Yeah.
time for not much money. And we actually had an energy guarantee out there that said, look, $20 a month, no matter where you live in the world. And
That's
that was
bold.
that was and we were frankly well below that. And of course, you're talking about 40 some years ago, so times were different, but we could make that claim confidently. I cannot remember ever getting called on it. And I got to believe there was a lot of engineers that bought this that wanted to test
Oh, I'm
to see
sure.
if this was really true or not. And I think we were substantially below that. And it was a compelling message. Again, when you consider who are the type of people that are going to venture out for something like this, you definitely had people that had a need that were looking for a solution, right? So you have people that actually have named diseases or are sick or something where they've run the gambit of medicine and all that. They're looking for a non-narcotic solution to what ails them, for their wife with rheumatoid arthritis or whatever. There were those kind of searchers back then. And God knows where they found information because, again, no internet. So
Yeah.
I don't know how they got out there, but they would find us and say, this might help. So you had the need people, and then you just had the sort of the want people over here. "Oh, that looks like fun," or I've been in one of those, or whatever. So there was these two different groups, but together they spanned everybody.
Yeah.
Nobody was disqualified unless, like I said, if you had a job and you lived somewhere, okay, you're in our target market. Think about that.
Yeah, it is pretty wild. Who were your competitors at the time? It is interesting that Southern California was a little bit of a hot tub hotbed, and I
It
guess still
was.
is
Yeah.
for when these got started. It was
Yeah.
like everyone was like, "Hey, we should make a hot tub."
You'd be happy to know this. The universal source of information back then were the trade publications. The
I believe it.
Sauna magazine and Aqua magazine. This is where you would learn about things. You would see other people's ads. You would go, oh my gosh, who are these people? Who are they? Where are they coming from? So you would learn about people there. And then you would learn when you would go on the road. There was a company at that time called Jericho that when I started, Jericho was the goods, man. If you didn't have Jericho, you weren't going to make it. That is the competition.
That's interesting.
Jericho's
I don't think I've ever heard of Jericho before, and I feel
Oh
like
my
I've heard
gosh,
of most
Jericho
of them at this
was
point.
so
That's
big. Some of the Jericho guys actually bounced out and formed Sundance. But yeah, Jericho was the goods. There was a company called Romanesque. There was Mr. Spa. I don't know if you've ever heard of Mr. Spa, Gary Stein. This guy basically produced these very low-end hot tubs, and then his way to market was the traveling roadshow. So if you think about the guy that does the Vitamix at the state fair, he would go, he'd have the headset on. The guy, there's a lot I could say negative about the guy, okay, in terms of playing fast and loose with the truth. But man, I'm telling you, that guy was a pioneer. That guy went out and he sold the heck out of these Mr. Spas. And he did it while people were standing in the audience, listening to his pitch, and then signing up right over there. So it was a compelling figure, Gary Stein. So he had a role. Mike Dunn's father's business, Hawkeye, which that name label might still be out there somewhere because they've been bought and sold, but they were a company out there. Gosh, there were so many. There were so many. And Watkins at the time was the company that all of those people seemed to be connected in some way. When you talk about Southern California, they were more in the Orange County, LA area. We're sitting down
sure.
here in sleepy Escondido, blah, blah, blah. And they all had known each other and worked for each other and jumped out and started their own thing or had been doing both
Yeah.
together or all that kind of stuff. And frankly, all of those guys, all of their stuff looked about the same.
Sure.
And then you had us down here that wasn't connected to that group at all. And we didn't even look the same. And so we were pointed to as the ugly duckling, right? All the dog dish and
And the dog dish,
all
I've
this
heard
kind
the
of
dog.
stuff. And I used to tell people, I say, look, we were the most expensive product out there. We had no choices. This is the way it comes. Here's your Schlotsky sandwich. This is the way it comes. And we were considered the least attractive. Okay. So we were like the unlikeliest people to make it when you
Yeah.
had all these other people that predated us and had the goods. And look what happened.
Yeah. Do you think it was the difference in the product and the engineering? Why do you think it was that you guys were the ones that are still around?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of reasons, and I
Sure.
alluded to one earlier. I think we were hustlers to the degree that nobody else ever saw. We
Mm.
went out in the country, weren't satisfied with just our small circle and growing the business that way, which is a legitimate strategy for small business people to just handle what they can handle. And we
Yeah.
just went out to the world and just took a bigger view of what we had. I think just based on the way we were designed, we had a better argument for people living in cold weather than other companies did. And so it was probably the right call for them to try to stay in temperate areas where they could. Meanwhile, there was nothing closed off to us. Hey, you live out here in cold. That's the best. That's the best. That's when you're really going to want to be in there, right? Here's what we've done to make that possible and all that. People, that makes sense. And so we had that kind of thing out there. We were still generating leads. So our name was going out there. We were
Mhm.
generating thousands and thousands of leads. And we had people back in San Marcos at the time, California. We're answering those phones. We're answering questions. We're not selling to these people. They're not going to buy from us, but they've got some information now and it's out there and chirping. And then as we got a little bit more success, we started adding other marketing vehicles and increasing that base. And then we started signing up these dealers, and we were keeping most of them. One of our mantras very early on, I think we always ran the business with some very philosophical principles that we were able to inculcate to everybody that worked there, that understood them and knew what we were trying to
Mhm.
do. And one of them was, we never lose customers, we only add them. We never lose customers, we only add them. That was just a mantra. We don't lose people, we just add new people. And so we would nurture our people. And with that came training.
Mm.
And I think you've been around Watkins long enough to know that, man, our training programs are legendary, world class, and all that kind of stuff. And even back in the day, comparatively, they still were. So if you invested in us and you signed up with us, we are going to come to you and we are going to train your people. And then you're going to get information from us every month that
Hmm.
is continuing this training. Why did we do this? Why didn't we do this? Here's how you sell it. Here's how you nurture customers. Here's how you take care of people. Here's how you know, and that, I think, if I had to pick one thing after the early years, because the lead gen and all that kind of stuff was a big thing,
Yeah.
huge thing. And it would have never been there without that. Would have never been out there without OT in the trailer. Okay. There's all these little things that sort of added up. But the fact that we committed to training people in a way that endeared themselves to us and tied themselves to us and created this unbelievable loyalty that we developed at that company for a very long time. Okay. In other words, we made the investment in the people that made the investment into us. That was the difference.
Yeah.
We wanted everybody to be big. In fact, we battled every opportunity we could to keep people small. There was a lot of conversation about, hey, we need to open a warehouse in the East and we need to do that. Why would we do that? People want to pick them up one at a time. I don't want people picking them up one at a time. If you give people an option to stay small, they're gonna. That's not what we want. Okay. They got to hurt. If they're at 3, we need them to go to 6. If they're at 6, we need them to go to 15. 15's a truck. That's the economic order quantity. Everybody should
Yeah.
be buying a truck. Okay. Don't let them off the hook and let them pick them up one at a time. First of all, the guy's going to drive 5 hours to pick up one and 5 hours back. That day is wasted on something that's already sold. How does that help us get bigger? So we always had a growth mindset. And we were working with our customers under the guise of, you can get big at this. This can be your only business. You can get out of the other businesses and concentrate on this 365-day-a-year business. And you can make a great living with it. And you can have something to sell at the end if you're interested. Okay. So a lot of these messages were integral to who we are, even back in the day when we were small. And frankly, and I always put this point in because I think this pertains to me specifically. I was too naive to know this wouldn't work. Okay. And I mean that in a sincere way, because you take seasoned business people and you put them into this company and you say, why are we spending all this advertising money? You don't have any distribution. Why are we doing this? This doesn't make any sense. And if you look at it that way from the pros eye, it didn't make any sense. But to us, who just felt like we were given carte blanche to go, and Jeff Watkins said to me, hey, I'm looking for self-starters here. Whatever you think is right, go do it. Honest to God, that was the most liberating day of my life. Okay. Because he told me, hey, we like you. You've got some good ideas. You're having some success here. Man, you see something worth doing, go do it. And that's what I did. And I was too naive to know that it wouldn't work, but it
Yeah,
did.
there is something to be said for that. Sometimes having that kind of institutional business knowledge is great and can help you out in a lot of situations. But yeah, sometimes, like you said, being naive is your best friend because you don't know any different. And
Yeah.
all you know is we have to survive. And so you're just going to do whatever it
Yeah.
takes to survive. And sometimes that doesn't make sense to the outside world, but we gotta increase that hot tub production by
Yeah.
1 tub this month. And this is no matter what, we're gonna make it happen. Like you just do things that you wouldn't otherwise do.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, what does the expert always say? Oh, we've tried that, it doesn't work. So that's the fear of the expert is, oh, we've been down that road before. And so you don't end up getting it done. But we didn't stop there.
Yeah.
And again, this idea of we never lose customers, the number of customers that can trace their roots back to OT Neal with the trailer, or Steve Hammock out there, or Spencer Jacobs, or Lee Pelfrey, Tom Neal, or any of these other people that were our early sales guys, Rick
Hmm.
Schlotman, that spent 20 years with us grinding away at this thing. That I remember the day that Spencer walked into my store. I remember the day that Lee came in, and they're
Hmm.
still with Watkins, and they built a business. They built a business.
Yeah,
And
it is amazing. Our industry is at such an interesting point, right?
yes,
Because it's still such a young industry. And
yeah,
so all of these people that you've mentioned, these first customers that you had are
yeah,
still in the business, are still running their businesses in a lot of cases, or just about to hand it off to the next generation or sell
yeah,
or whatever it may be. And so it's just so interesting because, yes, I've talked to so many dealers and it'll be like, "Oh, hey, when did you start selling hot tubs? When
yeah,
did you start selling this brand?" And yeah, that history goes back to they all the way, goes back all the way to the very beginning. It's so interesting and it's been really fun to collect those stories over the last
yeah.
couple of years and put together this oral history of the hot tub industry because now's the time. Like now's the chance where we can still do this.
Oh, for sure.
We got to capture it now so we don't
Yeah.
lose some of our history. I think it's such a good reminder and it's so good for people who are newer to the industry to to
Hmm.
know that history and see where we've come from and
Yeah.
how far we've come and the opportunities that are still there like you said. Those
Yeah.
are it's been such a fun project and you're so right. You can trace that lineage back for so
Yeah.
many people to the very
Yeah.
very beginning.
And the other thing that's important is loyalty only lasts as long as there's trust. And so I always felt like we were just really honest brokers. I could fill your next hour and a half with all the mistakes that we made
Sure.
and all the problems that we had. It's tough to get big in this business. These things are hard to store, they're hard to stack, they're hard to handle, but they're easy to break. And it's tough to get big in this business. This is why very few of us have actually gotten big
Mm.
in this business. And you only get that loyalty where those people stay with you if when you have an oops and you have a problem that you stand up to it, you pay for it, you apologize for it, you do whatever you can do to make it right. And I
Mhm.
think that's where our customers have always been with us is look, they talk to us, they tell us what's happening, they tell us why it's happening. Every once in a while we have an oops, and some of those oops I would put in the disaster category,
Mhm.
where what happened then? Watkins stepped up and they made me whole, or they didn't leave me hanging, or that kind of a thing. And I think that had always been a hallmark of our business. And I mean, it's not mutually exclusive. Any business can have that, but we did have that. And again, how come people stay is they trust their partner. And
Mhm.
I think we always looked at it as we're partners. We make them, you sell them. Okay. You don't get yours until your customer gets his. We don't get ours until you get yours. That's how it works. So we need you. You're the sales guy out there. Okay. We need you. There is no us without you, and there's no you without him. Okay. So if everybody in the process keeps their customer in the bullseye, in the center of the target, and they're making decisions with that customer view there, you're going to ultimately win. If there's anybody else in the center of your target that's not your customer, and then oftentimes in the business world, particularly small business world, the person in the center of the target is the business owner himself, right? That's okay. I'm not saying you can't make it, but I don't think it is as guaranteed a path to success as the other.
Yeah. So, how did the sale to Masco come about? What was the impetus behind that? Were they like, "Hey, hot tubs, let's do that. That's great."
Probably not. And I would say I was not involved in the sale, although I was there. So the
Sure.
sale transacted in December of 1986. I
Man,
got
that's like not that long after you started there.
Yeah, I got there in September of 1982, but what happened
Okay.
is 1983 was a big year. In 1984, we doubled. In 1985, we almost doubled. In 1986. So by coming in and really putting some marketing together, filling some gaps that weren't there, that's what I was hired to come in and do. We were having massive success. And I think the owners at that point, one of the things that they did really well in their partnership, because this was three guys that could not have been more different. You had John Watkins on one end, and then you had Jeff Watkins and OT Neal. And OT and Jeff were best friends, and Jeff and John were brothers. But John and Tom were really not that close. I got to be honest, right? And so one of the things they did in their partnership that made it work was, hey, everything important is going to go to a vote, and two votes beats one vote. And that's just the way it is. And John was a larger than life figure, and Tom was a larger than life figure, and Jeff was the person in the middle that nobody really knew. But Jeff was always the deciding vote. And they stayed true to that mission. And I know for a fact that Tom and Jeff wanted to sell, and John didn't want to sell, and two beats one. And next thing you know, we get sold. Now, if you look at what was going on in larger conglomerate companies back in the day, then they were on this massive buying spree where
Okay.
they weren't looking to buy companies necessarily that were in line with their present businesses or skill sets. They were just adding all these pieces. And I'm forgetting the word that they used to describe that kind of an acquisition strategy. You would recognize it. For some reason, I can't pull it up right now, but that's what Masco was doing. So they were quote unquote looking for good businesses. They
Yeah.
weren't specific to this thing or that thing or blah, blah, blah. And we were just a good business that they bought at that time. And a shock to those of us that were there. But again, there was not that many of us there, frankly.
Yeah.
And we continued to go about our business. And in a lot of ways, they made things easier. A lot of ways, they made things tougher. It was a this and a that kind of a thing. But I'd say on
Yeah.
balance, it was a benefit to us. And on balance, they've been a great partner. That partnership is 40 years old next year. Okay.
Yeah, I think that was as you're saying that, I'm like, that's pretty shocking. That was the strategy and that they
Yeah.
haven't sold you because a lot of times in those type of situations, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
companies will go out and buy a lot of companies and then things get as the years go on, things
They've
get kind
sold
of
so many
sifted
companies.
out. Yeah,
They
there's
bought so
just
many, they've sold so many. So they did do that. And frankly, I know that we were on the block to be sold more than once. And it was never about our own performance. It was over the course of 40 years, you have regimes that come in. And when you have regime change, you have strategy change. And there were plenty of years when we were just off strategy because the strategy changed in the middle because a new
yep.
team was in there. And we're just going to be selling these businesses that are off strategy. What was interesting about that from my perspective, because by that time I was very involved in all of that, was that you could see them working their way toward us, but we were going to be last. And there was a reason why, because we were a performing business. We were never a problem for them. Okay. Why? Because we grew every year. We were a growth engine and probably still are a growth engine at Masco. Okay. If you think about a lot of their businesses, their old line businesses, plumbing and things like this, there's a lot of rules involved in these businesses. You can't really just
Yeah.
venture out and invent a bunch of new stuff. It's gotta fit the old socket, and there's just things right here, and they become tough businesses to grow in unless you really venture out of your core competency. And Watkins was this just growth engine that made a lot of money, that great working capital metrics, and a great cash flow. And we just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So there was strategic reasons why we shouldn't be part of them. But
Right.
but man, we don't need to get there yet.
Yeah. When something's making you money, it's pretty hard to let it go.
Right before, there was a point in time where everything that Masco made could be bought in Home Depot except for us. So their strategy was they were hooked onto these big customer groups, and how much
Mm,
more can we get into Lowe's, and how much more can we get into and then we got this Watkins over here. Okay, so we didn't really fit. So there was a case where we were off strategy for them, but it never quite got to. And then a new regime would come in, and they would start evaluating. Now, what made it tough
yeah.
for me is we never seemed to make sense, and frankly, you'd run into these new high level business people. The idea of a hot tub, they just had never caught on. Okay.
Mhm.
They hadn't connected. The busier people get, the less they know in outside of their sphere, right? Why do we have this business? What is with this business? So, man, they would just ascend on us, and I would spend days walking people through the business and saying, here's what we actually do, and here's why we're important, and here's what we contribute to Masco, and here's what, because their inclination, everybody wants to make their mark. None of these guys is coming
Yeah.
in to get their career there. They're going to do their 5-year thing, get their money, and go. It's public company business. And I don't mean that negatively. I have lots and lots and lots of great people that have come through there, and I have so
Yeah.
many that came through there. But
Yeah. But
you
it's
just
just the
got to
way it
look at it.
is.
You got to look at how those businesses are structured, and we had to
Mhm.
just justify ourselves over and over and over again. And that role fell on me as the president of the business to train them and show them. And some guys would come in and there'd be a lot of bluster. Look, my inclination is, well, this is not a business that's going to work for us going forward. And so I'm coming into this with a little bit of an attitude that you're going to have to tell me why you should stay in our portfolio and all. So it wasn't coming in, this is going to be a fair fight. This, okay, Hammock, it's time to sell. Let's go. And we're still together.
It's pretty mind-blowing, actually. Was Masco public when they bought you, like, way back
Oh, yeah.
okay, okay. I wasn't sure the history of.
Masco became a public company in 1929, so they're almost 100 years old.
Okay, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing that you guys have stayed in the fold, and then also amazing that you stayed at the helm for that long too, because that's also not a normal thing in that world. Like you said, there's that cycle that is just what everybody goes through. But apparently you're good at pitching that.
I got a beautiful letter from Richard Manoogian upon my retirement, and he told me, and I didn't know this, that I was the longest serving executive in the history of that 100-year company. So yeah, it was amazing. Not only was I there for 40 years, but I was the president there for 25, and I left on my own terms and picked my own successor and things like that. Having observed them for a long time was not the norm there. Yeah, it was a blessing. It was a blessing. And I think it was a testament to how well the company performed and how we could articulate our own message. So every opportunity you're in front of people is an opportunity to sell, to impress, confirm, reconfirm, all those kinds of things. And we just had such a good team of people could go through the mantra every bit as good as I
Mhm.
could. The Mike Dunns of the world and the Steve Steigers of the world, the guys, people that you know that knew what we believed and they believed it and could be the person that could be the most persuasive in this particular group at this particular time. And we were all like
Mm.
that. They would look at us. This business is a sort of phenomenon. It's phenomenal because it's not uncommon, and it certainly wasn't uncommon there for people at the very top, people who basically sell stock for a living and not products, to look at all the businesses as if they're almost interchangeable parts.
Yep.
Oh, we've got some hot young people that are on our general manager to be list. And so as soon as there's an opening, we'll just put one in there. Okay. Or we'll take this guy that's running this small division and we'll put him over here in this big division. That's not how our industry works here. Okay. This relationship business here. Okay. And the relationships are with people. And you can't just plug a new person in and
Yeah.
expect the loyalty to necessarily be there because people are hanging on exclusively because they trust Mike Dunn
Yeah.
or they trust Steve Hammock or they trust Matt Teague or they trust Steve Steigers or they trust Rick Schlotman and in that way it made it different. And I think even within the hot tub business, we were different in that way. We worked our tails off to put people together.
Mm.
We had so many events where we bring all of our customers together, whether it's our dealer conferences, our trip, our training, whatever we have, our retailer boards and all this kind of stuff. We bring all these people together because what makes the business unique is that when you're in a room with all these other people, they're literally doing exactly the same thing that you're doing for a living, but they're not competing with you.
Mhm.
Okay. So it allowed them to be very open with here's what I tried that works. What have you done that works? And this sharing and all this kind of stuff. And we were always a part of that. Sometimes we would step out and say, you guys determine your own fate here. And we're going to keep at arm's length. And sometimes we'd be right in the middle of the mix as the partners to make sure we were all on the same page. Everybody looked at each other as one big team with different roles that needs to work cohesively so that we can all win. And our goal is to all win.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about that too is that when you bring people together like that, they form a true community and you don't leave your community. You know what I mean? You don't just
Yeah.
leave, you don't just pick up and leave your friends.
Yeah.
That's just not how humans are built. Like we want to stay together, we want to be together. And so there's that
Yeah.
psychology of it too, where it's, yeah, these are my people. I'm not going anywhere.
And you know, it wasn't for everybody.
Sure.
We're dealing with entrepreneurs out there, and entrepreneurs are different people, right?
Yeah.
There were some people that are like, hey, man, I like to do my own thing, and all that kind of thing. Okay, look, and I would tell people over and over again, look, you know what my favorite way is? If you've got a way that works, that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
But while you're working on your way that works, why don't you try it our way? Because it also works. But some people just said, there's too much love in the
Yep.
room,
Yep.
right? They never got it. They never understood it, or it wasn't for
Yeah.
them. And that's
Yep.
fine. But yeah, but who's left? Those people are all
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
You get the force multiplier of that.
Yeah. So when you look back from the beginnings of Watkins and the hot tub industry, what are the things that stick out to you as, I don't know, as challenges that either you guys had to overcome or the industry as a whole? What are some of the ones that stick out to you as, "Ooh, that was tough. Here we still are."
There was nothing as hard as the Great Recession. COVID was hard. The aftermath of COVID, because the way that the pendulum swung.
Hmm.
But what made COVID different than the Great Recession was that our consumer did not get hurt. Our consumer thrived during COVID.
Right.
You look at the Great Recession, our consumer got laid off. Our consumer couldn't make the mortgage payment. Okay. That made it so tough. And frankly, the Great Recession in our industry was longer than it was in many industries. We have the unenviable position of being first in, last out.
Yeah.
Okay. There's almost no businesses that you can think about that. Why? Because we're still discretionary to a point.
Hmm.
Okay. It's one of the reasons we've been working so hard on the whole wellness message is to make it more of a need than a want. Our tagline, feel good, live well. All I have to do is ask somebody, when do you want to start feeling good and living well, today or after the economy improves,
Sure.
right? So you're say, hey, let's go now kind of a thing. But the Great Recession at the time, we can trace the beginnings for the hot tub industry to, believe it or not, July of 2005. You hear people talk all the time about 2007 and 2008, but July 2005, and it required us being years past it to really look back on
Sure.
that, is when the housing bubble really burst. Okay. And at the time, home equity was the primary financing source for these types of products because banks were giving out HELOCs and they were doing all this kind of stuff. That's how people were funding. And then all of a sudden that stopped.
Hmm.
Okay. And the one thing that you had that would always save you if you got completely desperate is, let's just sell our house. Now you can't sell your house because
Yeah.
you owe more than you could get for, right? That's when it started, right? And it started when the home equity went away. And then shortly after that, you had the big retail lenders like AIG, who we
Hmm.
were with at the time, said, hey, we're pulling out of the consumer space for now. Okay, boom, you've lost the bank and now you've lost the traditional lender. And then on top of that, you had the Textrons of the world pull out of the dealer
Yeah.
financing. Okay. Because the financial markets just all tipped over one at a time. So now our customers can't borrow against their home, they can't get a traditional loan. And our frontline customers, our wholesalers, can't buy on credit
Hmm.
because the creditor left, right? So the brilliant idea that I think we started, but maybe not, but I think we started of bringing in a third-party financier, the Textrons, the Wells Fargos, the GEs of the world. We brought that into the business to help the retailer be bigger than he really
Right.
was, which allowed him to actually get that big. They went out. So these were all the dominoes that started the fall. The reason that 2005 wasn't so bad and 2006 wasn't so bad because at that exact same time, the rest of the world was catching on to the hot tub thing. So the European business was all of a sudden blow, and some of these other sort of offshore businesses are blowing up. It's masked what was happening in the United States. So you had the international business going like that at the same time the American business was going like that. And the result was like this for a little bit. but the US market was failing, and it was failing very fast. And that was the big market. Thank God that nobody said to us or to me, hey, by the way, you think it's bad now? This is going to last for another 4 years,
Right.
because I don't know if any of us could have taken it
Yeah.
or hung in there. Okay. And I'll speak for myself. I mean, it was bad enough being in it, but if somebody says, hell, you got a long way to go, you're on the Baton Death March here, man. It would have been a lot
Yeah.
different. But yeah, this thing, it wasn't until 2010 when things started to really pick up
Yeah.
again. And then we went on a nice long run. But that was a particularly thing, the COVID thing, other problems involved in
Yeah.
it. I don't want to go into that right now, but that was sort of the end of my time too. And frankly, I had already communicated I was leaving in 2019, and then COVID hit in 2020, and it
Hmm.
was like, oh, okay, I guess
Never mind.
I've got more to do here before we go. Um, we had a very interesting problem that was germane just to us and a company called Dimension One. If you remember Dimension One, I think they're probably still around in some
Yeah.
form. Back in 1996 or so, maybe it was a little earlier than that. You would look at the totality of the hot tub market, and the way we always defined it was everybody else is a cola and we're 7 Up and D1 is Sprite, right? Okay, we're the two that were sort of most alike in visual appearance and material.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, everybody else was in the acrylic business, and we made our products out of a material called Rovell. And Rovell was thermoplastic that was developed by Uniroyal. And we'd been using it for as long as I was with the company. They were into Rovell. I joined in 1982. The mistake that they made at that time, and I probably would have made at that time if I was in charge, I'd probably done the same thing, is they had decided to use Uniroyal's material name, Rovell, as our material name. We use Rovell.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So somewhere shortly after I joined in 82, Uniroyal sold Rovell to Dow Chemical. And Uniroyal had been making the material in what they call a batch process, right? So you gonna make a cake, you do a big cake batter and bake that cake. Dow was going to make it a continuously run
Sure.
process. And that's how they were going to make money. And they never could pull it off.
Oh,
Years and years and years went by where we were now buying from Dow, but Uniroyal was still making it. Okay. And Dow was trying to get their process perfected, and they never could pull it off. And then they decided, we're done. We're going to get out of it. We're just going to close that down. And because we'd had a lot of success, everybody that was in the business, every other company out there had dabbled in Rovell. Everybody had ordered some sheets
sure.
and brought it in, and they were making a Rovell product to try to compete. Oh, we have that if that's what you want, and
Yeah.
that, but we sell this primarily, that kind of a thing. And on the day that they decided they were going to close up shop, they sent a letter to everybody in the industry saying, "Hey, we're discontinuing this product. Have a nice day." Okay, and everybody got it at the same time. And for us, it was literally 100% of our effort.
Oh no.
We built an entire company around this.
Oh
Okay.
no. Of
I remember this letter comes over the fax
course.
machine, right? This tells you how far back we are. I get a call from Bob Hallam in 5 minutes. Bob Hallam was the president of
I knew Bob.
Dimension.
Yeah.
And Bob and I were sort of friends, but we were
Yeah.
competitors, and they were making their living off of us. And, at least that was our view and that kind of a thing. What are we going to do? And I said, oh, Bob, don't worry about it, man. We're not going to panic. That's what we're not going to do. We've got 60 days. Don't worry about it. We're on this. Yeah, it's going to be all right. And I just talking out of my head just because I'm like, no, I'm not getting into a cabal here. I just got this myself. I don't know what we're going to do here. And man, we had to re-engineer, because it wasn't obvious that we just jump over to acrylic now. And we've been competing against acrylic for the entire duration of our
Right.
company.
Right.
It just wasn't an option, right?
Yeah.
We had to go somewhere else. And we ended up finding an alternate product that was made by Roman Haas at the time that we ended up putting our own trade name on, called Endurall. We switched into and maintained the same visual look, but with a different product altogether. And it came with some challenges perhaps we weren't as prepared for as we would have liked to, but man, we were out of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had no other options, and we ended up bridging that gap. We had sent a letter to every one of our customers. We sent a FedEx letter to every one of our customers
Okay.
when that thing came out. And because again, there was no other medium,
Yeah.
okay, and you didn't get a FedEx very often. And so everybody got this. And then we just said, hey, we got this. You probably already saw this. Don't worry about it. We've got options here. We're going to be making some decisions. We're going to be okay and all that. And just to let everybody know, this is a big deal. You're with the right partner and all that kind of thing. We were living on the edge.
Yeah, that's a gut punch.
That was a massive one. That was a massive one.
Yeah.
But what we ended up ultimately doing is we were in Enduro for a long, 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 long time, and that was our primary product. Right about that same time is when Aristech came out with their Quarite product, which is a novel look at the time. And we stepped a little bit into there, and we
Yeah.
got bloody hell from some people, the old line
Oh, sure.
people, and all. But I think that I could always look at people straight faced and say, look, guys, I know you're very, 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 very hot spring. Okay. But I'm in the unique position of being more hot spring than everyone. I'm the only guy that was there at the very
Yeah.
beginning. Okay. And I'm more hot spring than you, and we're never going to do anything to break it. Okay. We're only going to make moves to help it because we love it. And you just have to have confidence that this is one of those situations, and we're going to keep going here and we're going to be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. When did you end up making the full switch to acrylic then?
Oh God, many
Okay.
years later, and that was just a strategic shift. And there became a point, and we're probably still in this time period now. Where nation is harder to come, falling away. The good ideas shared and mutual. There wasn't as many opportunities to make a dramatic shift in how the product functions, and this is a very important thing for everybody to know. There's really not a lot of maneuverability that you have. What we've learned over time is there's a lot of interesting shapes that you can make, okay, but people ultimately buy either the square one or the rectangle. It's the craziest.
Yep.
Round doesn't really, oddball doesn't really sell, even if people find it really, and it's like you're redesigning your kitchen and you see something in the book that says, wow, that's great. What's only going to last 3 years and you're going to have to change it again. And
Yep.
nobody wants to do that. So they end up, I don't want to say traditional, but maybe more conventional
Hmm.
color, white or brown or whatever. Same kind of thing with shape. So dictated.
Yep.
The interior has to fit human bodies. Okay. So you can't really go hog wild in the interior because it's not going to be comfortable. It's not going to work,
Right.
right? It's that fixated. The exterior of hot tubs are dictated by the interior of container ships and trucks. Okay. So it's not going to really get any bigger.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And we already use as much power as the house will generate. Okay. And from that power, you put as many holes in it as possible to make these jets go. There's not a lot of other ways to differentiate it in a meaningful way. So now, where's the battle lines going to be drawn?
Yeah.
And one of those battle lines, I think, is around the concept of design. Okay. And design doesn't necessarily mean not making them square or rectangular, but what do you do with that design? And then color then plays a role and some other things. And it was that transition for our business at some point, and I couldn't even tell you what the year was, where we said, look, a design needs to be a greater focus. The days of selling an engineered product that looks the way it does,
Right.
because that's gone, it's lost its utility a little bit, and now we need to go into a different profile. And it was from that profile we shifted into more of a palette color
Sure.
thing. And it's just
Sure.
the ongoing strategic decisions.
Yeah. 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 That's interesting. You're so right. There is only so much you can do with a hot tub. That makes sense. And yeah, it kind of
If you're after volume,
100%.
right?
100%. Yeah. I've seen
Yeah,
some real interesting things in the last, however, 16 years that,
yeah.
yeah, they just, yeah, they're not for volume. They were for some big
If it's hard,
customer.
if it's hard to make and or it's hard to ship,
Hmm.
then you're going to have to charge more money for it. People want the price points are as real in this business as they are in any other. There is going to be an individual that's going to pay the premium that wants that one that
Right.
doesn't look like anything else. But if it's hard to make or hard to ship, you're eventually going to not want to make very many of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to ask a question, but I think I know the answer. Do you see the future of our industry really in fully leaning into the wellness benefits and the wellness aspect of our products?
I
Yeah.
do. I do. There's a lot of great reasons to own this product. I think that that fits us directly into the wellness trend that's going on with consumers that can only get bigger.
Yeah.
Okay. And I used to tell people, it's already big. I go, I don't care how big it is. It'll never be smaller
Yeah.
than it.
We talk about the wellness trend, but they were making exercise videos in the 80s.
Yeah.
This is just life. This is what we all are trying to do for our whole life is
Think
feel
about,
good and
think
get
about
through
this.
it.
Yeah. Think about this. It'll never be smaller than it is today. It doesn't matter how big it is today.
Yeah.
It could be massive, but it'll never be smaller. So I think we fit sort of hand in glove there. And then you look at all sorts of other realities that are going on. Backyards are going away, man. You see these new housing
Yeah.
tracts getting built. Houses are like on top of each
Yeah.
other. They're not going to have a pool. The backyard space is going to be very limited. You're not out there throwing. You're not going to get six stepped off. So you teach your son how to pitch. So what are you going to do with that backyard? We still are a natural fit there. So much
Yeah.
opportunity. And frankly, it's going to be for the next generation of people to figure out because those of us that have a story like mine, we're at near the and incumbent upon people like us to hire really smart people, have their own ideas that have the capacity to take this to where it's going
Yeah.
next.
So I don't want to take up your entire day. I probably could. We could go through this decade by decade and cover all the highlights. But I don't want to ask you about the challenges without asking on the other side. What are some of the milestones that really stick out to you for yourself, for the industry, or for Watkins, the things that like, really stick out?
When you're in this, you have financial milestones, and $100 million was a 100 million was a big deal. They're many times greater than many times greater, but that was a big milestone. We crossed in 1998, believe it or not. It goes
Okay.
back a long time.
Yeah.
I'm particularly proud of some of the acquisitions we made because we had a very good acquisition strategy that involved a lot of different things. But one of the key components was two key components. One, we needed our customers to look at the deal when we would put it in front of them and say, that makes
Yep.
sense. Okay. And there's been some deals in this industry, not ours, that what do they do that for? And I don't think we ever had a deal like
Nope.
that. And then we needed those deals to also benefit, in addition to new markets, because we always wanted to get into new markets, but we needed also to benefit the one who brought. We needed our customers to go, I see it, and I see how that can help me, and I like it, and I'm with you.
Yeah.
I think we had a good track record there.
Hmm.
Some of the other milestones is seeing some of the young people that were at young ages
Yeah.
that work their way up, and some of them are going to be running the business one of these days. You're really just really proud of, people that caught your eye, that you gave a chance to, that more than exceeded your expectation,
Yeah.
and just really.
That's the feel good part of it.
Yeah.
You talked earlier about this being a relationship business and it
Yeah.
really is. And I think when I talk to anybody in the industry, that's the thing that they always go back to is the relationships with their customers, the relationships with their coworkers, the relationships
Yeah.
with their colleagues.
One other thing I would put in there, I remember we had a guy named Rick Schlotman. I don't know if you ever knew Rick or not. Rick was an older gentleman when we hired him. And that's a great story for another time I'll have to tell you about. I put Rick in charge of our international business way back in the 90s somewhere.
Okay.
And he really built our international business. And then at the ripe old age of 72, he retired. Okay. And I think he was with Watkins for 20 years.
Okay.
So he probably hired him in his 50s and he worked there for another 20 years. And it was the first time that I could remember, man, somebody actually retired from our company. This is a real company,
Yeah.
and it wasn't like somebody that just came in and quit. We always had people come in and quit. This guy ran through the tape and then called it quits.
Hmm.
Okay. And then had other VPs and senior people and people that were with us for 30 years and 40 years and things like this retire. And for me, as a business leader, to just say, yeah, this is where you can have a career here. This is we bring them along. You've got upward mobility. You've got purpose in the job. You have resources here. We're going places. We've got a growth mindset. We're going to keep going here. And this is a place where you can spend your career and retire at the end and look back and gosh, we built something.
Yeah. What does your life look like retired? Has it been okay to step away. For some people, it's real tough. Others step right
Yeah.
into it, no problem.
I miss talking about things like
Mm,
this because I think I still have a lot to offer people in these kinds of conversations. I don't miss. I took over a company that was very small, and I left a company that everybody wants a job that they at some point you get into a job. The parts of it that you don't love take 90% of the time, and you have to do it,
yeah,
and that kind of a thing. So I don't miss that part. But I'm enjoying working on my handicap like all of us guys that retire. I've got a very large family and we're having grandkids all over the place and most of them are local. And so I might get to spend a lot of time with my adult
yeah,
children and grandkids and all that kind of stuff. We've taken some pretty neat trip. My bucket list was checked this year when I went to Scotland and on a golfing outing there with 7 of my all-time best friends going back to college. And played all the courses we want to play and all. I'm enjoying my retirement very much. I don't feel the urge to get into work.
yeah,
I do think that everybody needs purpose, and I could probably do a better job with my time on a charitable side or a church side or something like that. But I'm relatively new to retirement
yeah.
here, and believe me, you retire and you start realizing that your own personal life needs more attention than you were able to give it while you were
Sure.
so the
Yeah,
last couple of years, I've spent a long time trying to get my own house in order, because there's just a lot. You got to make sure that all the T's are crossed and
yeah.
the I's are dotted for your kids because one day you won't be here and you want to make it easy. So that's how I've spent my time.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So I'm not going to do the full Spa Retailer 5 with you because I feel like we've already answered a few of these questions already. But we
Okay.
usually ask people the same 5 questions at the end of every podcast interview. But there
Oh,
are a
okay.
couple on here that I still think we should find out. What was your first real job?
When I came out of college, I had a degree in advertising and I went to work for a couple of newspapers in Phoenix area and I was a promotion manager for them.
Okay.
So it was a funny conversation I had with my dad. I came to my walk through graduation and he said, "What are you going to do next?" And I said, "I just got accepted to graduate school and I think I'd want to go." And then he goes, "Do you have any money?" Knowing the answer already.
Right.
And I said, "No." He goes, "I think you ought to get a job then." And that was 100% of the conversation.
Uh,
And I think that was probably on a Wednesday, and I started at the paper, I think, on Monday. And then I left there on a Friday and started at Watkins on the following
all
Monday. I
right.
moved from here. So I worked from the day I graduated college to the day I retired from Watkins. I worked without any gaps, but in all of it prepared me for the job I did at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have a
Yeah.
favorite, I don't know, favorite book or television show, podcast, something that you find yourself going back to for relaxation or enjoyment or just that you feel like you've learned a lot from?
Gosh, I'm just a rabid consumer of the news. I know what's going on in the world from a point of view. I've read so many books on so many different things. I'd be hard pressed to say that there was a Bible for me or anything those
Yeah.
lines. I lived from a very simple philosophy, and that was my dad's philosophy, and it was be honest. And you've heard me in the other interview to say this kind of a thing. Boy, that just can get you on the right. I'm straight with people. I'm the same person all the time. And, I call them as I see them. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's not a good thing. And it is the thing. But I think people that know me know that I'm playing them straight. And that's always sort of been my life focus.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for doing this. It was a pleasure. I feel like we've left a lot on the table. I mean, I feel like we need a part two, but it was really fun to talk with you about your journey in the hot tub industry and of Watkins Wellness. So thank you so much for doing this.
Well, again, it was my pleasure. It's always great to see you and like the format here. And gosh, if you ever need me for anything, just let me know.
The Spa Retailer Podcast is a production of Spa Retailer Magazine. Let us know what you think by leaving a review or emailing us at podcast@sparetailer.com. Thanks for listening.